and was a human aspect. Hence, I did once call myself a global village on two legs, which refers to hundreds of millions of people on this planet, and it's a way of saying that many of us have a new way of living, and a new way of writing, and a new way of dreaming, and a new way of interacting with other people. And that is really, to me, the heart of globalism in every sense. That's much more important than the externals. And McDonald's and Microsoft and even MTV are the physical manifestations of globalism, but I'm not sure any of those are going to sustain us. Even Britney Spears may not sustain us. And so when I look to Desmond Tutu or Václav Havel or our new president or the Dalai Lama, it seems that what they're really working at is a global consciousness that in some ways will help us much more as we enter a new century. Now I could talk much, much more, but I won't, because I think it's kind of time that I should open this up to you. And so if you have any questions, I won't have answers, but I'd love to hear questions. And I think Deepacha has that.
Sound in this room, but can you hear me? Yes. All right, I'll pass this around as I see hands go up.
I think there's a hand here in the second row.
Thank you for your wonderful insight. I was wondering, in the context of sort of bringing these two subjects together, the notion of home and global village in the context of the Dalai Lama, I wonder if you could speak to how India has been affected by the presence of Tibetan refugees in Dharamsala.
Thank you. That's a beautiful question. And I think there are many Indians in this room who know much more about it than I do. But very few people think about it. And to me, it's been an almost unqualified blessing. The Dalai Lama always goes out of his way to extend his almost unspeakable gratitude to India. And he always says, first, that Tibet has always been like India's little brother. And so he thinks there's a historic and poetic rightness about India, from which Buddha and Buddhism came, now sheltering its little sibling. And he says it's like a master taking care of a pupil. But even more than that, he always says that India, which has so many problems of its own and so many impoverished people of its own, to reach out and take in 130,000 people, to risk the rage of the largest country in the world and its obvious rival, and really to extend itself on behalf of the Tibetans in ways that most countries in Asia haven't been in a position to do. One reason he comes to Japan every year is that Japan is almost the only Buddhist country that will even see the most prominent Buddhists in the world. Thailand, Sri Lanka, Burma, Vietnam, all those countries are much too terrified of China to extend an invitation. So India has really put itself out on behalf of the Tibetans. And I think every Tibetan, the first thing he says when he wakes up is, thank you, India, for giving us a home. And I think, such is the Dalai Lama's thinking, he wouldn't be surprised to feel that India has been a beneficiary too, partly to have this ancient, deep, rich tradition now within its borders. I noticed 20 years ago, when I flew to India, if I went into a bookshop, most of the books presenting India to the world, which showed beautiful Mughal architecture, the Taj Mahal, perhaps the Kama Sutra, palaces and silks. Now, I'd say 40% of the books in an Indian bookshop aimed at foreign visitors would show Tibetan Buddhism and the Dalai Lama, and would say, well, this is really one of the wonderful things that we have now in our country. And what I've also noticed going to Dharamsala over the years is that more and more of the visitors there are actually from India. Initially, it was all people from California and France and Australia. But with each passing year, I think Indians are being reawakened to that aspect of their tradition. And insofar as Buddhism has been relatively dormant all these years in its birthplace, it's wonderful to see the Tibetans bring it back. And in his last book, the Dalai Lama says, he actually writes, well, I lost my home, and thus I gained the whole world as my home. And I think he really bears that out, because almost every community in the world is very keen to have him as an honorary citizen or as an adopted member of their community. So I think that it's a wonderful example of mutual benefit, and finding that place where neither party gains, but as long as one takes a risk, as India did, both stand to end up much richer. And the other interesting thing that one's finding is more and more Chinese, of course, turning to Tibetan Buddhism, with a special ache and a special intensity, because they've been denied any religion for 60 years. So when those of us in California turned to Tibetan Buddhism, it's probably because we feel that it answers some hole that our own tradition doesn't answer. But I think in China that hole is even bigger because people have officially been denied religious practice. And so they're suddenly noticing within their country too they've got this wonderful repository to help them in moments of need. But thank you for such a good question.
Yeah, thank you very much for your excellent insight in his life. As he has insight in root causes and you have connections with him, you met politicians and you met religious leaders in the world. What do you think what he talks to those two groups different? Because all the misery belongs to these two guys who are creating misery, correct? Unless you tell me what else is that about. Politicians and religious leaders in the world, when he goes and meet them, what does he talk?
When he talks to the politicians?
Yeah, or religious leader. Well, these are the two people who made the misery.
Well, he would say they're the two people who make potential happiness, but it comes to the same thing probably. Well, it's easy to say what he talks about to religious leaders, and I've sat in on many interfaith meetings that he's been engaged in, and also I think when he meets scientists, from his point of view, that's an interfaith meeting also. And I think one thing that most people might not understand about the Dalai Lama is he's probably much more enthusiastic as a student than as a teacher. And when you go to see him, he's much more keen to hear what you have to offer to him than to start pontificating or lecturing to you. So he's delighted in the fact that he's the first Dalai Lama in history who can go and visit the Pope and learn from the Pope, who can go to Jerusalem, as he has done, who has met Native American peoples. And I think what religious people say is that when a Christian meets a Buddhist and they have a real conversation, the Christian, by listening to a Buddhist, grows deeper in his Christianity, and the Buddhist, by listening to the Christian, gets an even more refined sense of Buddhism. And I think that's exactly what the Dalai Lama has been doing, which is deepening, questioning, challenging, and refining his own Buddhist commitment by talking to non-Buddhists all over the place. And one thing that's surprising to many people too is he always speaks out against the world religion. When he's at an interfaith meeting, he says, well, we do have common goals, and I'm so glad we're all talking together, but let's not too quickly forget all the very significant differences, and let's not too quickly make a synthetic religion that actually is the point of convergence but dispenses with all the depths of our individual traditions. So he's a firm believer in each tradition, each religious tradition being separate from the other and being acknowledged. And he says it's like medical systems. There's a place for Ayurveda, there's a place for Tibetan medicine and Chinese medicine and Western medicine. And let's not try and compress them all into one system, we'll be the losers. Because different bodies respond differently to different medical systems, and different minds respond differently to different religious systems. So while making that qualification, it's kind of like the U2 song, we're one but not the same. He's also saying, I'm so glad that at least we could meet, because I once asked him what was the worst problem in old Tibet, and he said isolation. Without question. We were too isolated. We learned nothing from the world. We knew nothing about what was happening in the modern world. We knew nothing what was happening in the spiritual world. Now, what he talks about with political leaders is a harder one, because those are usually very closed-door meetings. But I think the impressive thing about him is that even as a political leader, all his political thought arises from his spiritual beliefs, such as interdependence, such as the sense that there's no us and them, there's only a single one entity to be considered. And he always makes distinctions between the man and the policy. The last time I saw him, he said, I love President Bush, I respect President Bush, but his policies are a disaster. And conversely, I remember I was traveling on a train with him about 15 months ago in Japan, and I said something harsh about Mao Zedong, the man who essentially destroyed Tibet. And instantly he whirled around and he said, no, don't say anything bad about Mao Zedong. His actions were wrong, but the man is not. And holding to that Buddhist principle that nobody is inherently wrong or evil or whatever, even though we don't always live up to our best sides. So if he takes that kind of thinking into the White House or the European Parliament, I think everyone will gain.
Thank you. Really enjoyed your talk. My question is very brief. What is the essence of his personality? What impresses everybody, including you, in Dalai Lama, so that he has become such a popular leader in the world?
Thank you. These are actually really, really good questions. I appreciate them. And my first answer would be humanity. And a part of that would be humility. But I think as I was saying before, when he's meeting a little girl or when he's meeting me after the Nobel Prize or whoever he's meeting,